Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Lucore Automotive. We're not at Lucore Automotive, we are back at McVay Automotive and Machining up here in the Mount Vernon area, and we're running the 451 Mopar again. As you hopefully saw in the previous episode with this motor, we are basically trying to verify what our issues were before when we ran it on this other dyno. Quick little recap, the idea is this thing is hitting a shelf at like 4,200 RPMs and just stops making power. It makes essentially exactly the same horsepower from 4,200 RPMs to 5,200 RPMs, and it shouldn't be doing that. So the question was, what's causing this? What's our problem? Are we running into a valve float issue? Are we running into a carburetor issue? Are we running into a timing issue? Are we running into an ignition issue? Are we running into a head flow issue? Are we running into an intake manifold issue? What's the issue? Well, in the first video, we verified exactly what was going on, and we could get a little bit of data because we are actually running this thing on a Sniper EFI system. In this episode, we are going to hopefully get a whole lot more data and a whole lot more work in because we got a lot of pieces and parts to put on this thing. If you're interested, stay tuned. Now let's recap real quick as far as what this actually is. This is a 451 Mopar, so it's a 400 cubic inch block, the last generation of the big blocks. So you Mopar guys think like your 383s. And then you take a 440 crank and a set of 440 rods and you put those inside this 400 block with a set of Icon forged pistons on top, bored out 4375. This comes out to 451 cubic inches. Now the original way that this was run on the original dyno that we did, it was running the dual plane Performer 383 intake manifold, and it ran on a Demon carburetor. We have run this thing on the exact same intake manifold and this Sniper EFI system, and it came within 1 horsepower of what it made on that Demon. It made 420.5 at 4,900 RPMs at the other dyno location. At this new dyno location, it made 419.5 on a Sniper. So unbelievably accurate as far as that goes. Now we are seeing this running a little bit fatter than we would be really excited about, but it's still in learning mode. These things are actually pretty cool where you get them up to temperature and they adjust their air fuel trims and start learning as you drive it around where to put fuel and how to put fuel based on throttle percentages and all that stuff. They actually learn themselves, so instead of you having to go to a tuner to be able to learn all of that stuff and program it all in, the system actually learns itself. But the problem is that's designed to be used on a car. So you put it in the car and you drive the car around at various throttles and various loads and up and down hills and different situations. Obviously we can't do that because we're in a dyno cell. So the only thing we can do is get it up to temperature and then drive it around on the dyno by using the water brake to hold the engine back at various loads and then give it various levels of throttle. If that makes sense, hopefully it does. One of the other great things that comes with this thing is the ability to get data out of it. So we have the ability actually through this Holley Sniper EFI, it has a micro SD card in it that you can data log with. So it allows us to actually troubleshoot this way more efficiently than we would be if we were just using a normal carburetor. We can see throttle positions, we can see IAC, we can see injector pulse, we can see injector duty cycle, we can see AFRs, we can see all kinds of things in the actual data itself. So it allows us to really kind of see what exactly is going on. Now something we were battling in the other video, which again if you haven't seen it please go back and watch that, is this thing was running pretty well but it was fouling out plugs. So it is overfueling just a little bit, but I believe that's because of the fact that it's still in kind of a learn mode, and so it's starting out with a pretty conservative tune and it will start to lean itself out as it learns. We're not going to spend forever driving this thing around on the dyno to be able to get this thing into really like perfect learning mode. So it will actually get better once we take this and put it in the car than it is now. But it's close enough as far as what we want to know. Now, as far as where we are at this point, The dual plane Performer 383 has been taken off. This now has the Performer RPM intake manifold on it. So it is a taller intake manifold, still dual plane, that is designed for a little bit higher rev range. So what we're hoping for is, if it is an issue where the intake manifold was just refusing to process enough air to feed this thing, that should give us better airflow and should allow us to make more power. The very end of the last video, we actually ended up running out of water on the water break, so we kind of had to call it quits at that point in time. So we're going to get this thing fired up and make a pull on it as it sits right now and see if that setup works correctly. And maybe it makes more power, maybe it fixes our problem, but it probably isn't. What almost everybody is thinking is right now, the problem is going to be these cast iron heads. These are Motorhome Heads. So they are designed for lower RPM, more torquey solutions. They're not really designed to make horsepower, not really designed to flow up on the top end. So we're going to guess, and unfortunately we don't know the answer to this yet, that these heads probably max out flow at like 200 or 210 CFM. So horsepower rise, that means they're going to max out at like 400 or 420 horsepower, which is right exactly where we're running into that wall, and it just refuses to go any further than that. You can rev it further, it just stops making more power, which doesn't make any sense. So what we're most likely running into is an issue with these heads just cannot flow anymore, which is frustrating, but there's a way around that. And we already have the solution for this sitting here at McVay Automotive. And it is these brand new Edelbrock cylinder heads. So Bob has had these up here for a while, and he's actually been flow bench testing them for us on his Super Blow flow bench. So we know how much these things flow, and they are definitely capable of doing what we asked them to do. So those are probably going to be on this thing by the end of this, and we're going to know what this thing can really make when it can breathe. So we've got some work to do. Hopefully you guys are interested in a bunch of dyno stuff, because we're going to give you everything we could possibly give you, and hopefully it ends in a good day with lots of power and awesome Mopar noises. Now, in order to make this as perfect as possible, we have a brand new set of MSD wires, and we have a brand new set, or two, of plugs for this thing. And reason being is we want to just remove every possible issue from what's going on here. A couple of these boots have been heated and burnt, and we just want to make sure that it's not an issue with, you know, a signal from the wire jumping or anything along those lines. You can see here it's a little fried on the outside. This is probably not the issue, and especially since we have them in these plug boot protectors, but we know we were fouling out plugs, so we're going to put a brand new set of plugs in it. But since we're doing that anyway, we're going to go ahead and pull these wires off. It is a Pro Billet distributor. It is run through a 6AL box, so that's what's controlling all that stuff. And we're going to just go ahead and replace all these wires, replace all the plugs, so we know everything is fresh and ready to rock and roll, and then get this thing fired up, get it up to temp, and then make a pull on it as it sits right now. Yeah, that's the plan. For transparency and educational sake, all the NGK plugs are in. We are running a set of NGK XR53332s, and just a set of pre-made MSD wires are going to be going on here. Brand new MSD wires. Everything's nice and locked down. We also are going to replace the coil wire just to make sure we don't have any breakup going on there. So we've got a brand new Excel 6-foot long coil wire we're going to use for that guy. Not that we needed 6 feet, but better more than not enough, right? These are the plugs that were coming out of it. These are the champions from last time we were running them, and as you can see, they're fouling out pretty quickly. As far as the reading the strap goes, that's an episode for another day, but you can turn some interesting knowledge off of the burn on the strap and how it looks, where it is, what color it is, that kind of thing. But it was very obviously overfueling, but it's better to run rich than lean. So brand new set of NGK plugs. We'll get our wires connected back up, get this thing fired up and ready to rock and roll. Something we're going to try to do here is on the initial startup and the running process, it does end up running rather lean. So we're actually going to kind of cheat the system here a little bit. This is a 451 cubic inch motor. We're going to tell it it's a 411 and see if that pulls a little bit of the fuel out of the tabling, so it doesn't run quite so rich right off the rip and foul out our plugs immediately. We gotta get this thing up to temperature. At 160 degrees in water temperature, this thing kicks itself into learn mode. Otherwise, it runs in like pre-programmed mode. So right now, it's just a matter of let it run, make sure everything's good to go. We don't have any leaks, we don't have any problems. Get it up to temp. We can make a rip, see what she does. Listen to that building. Pretty good. So we should be in learning mode. So this is a bit more tricky than running a carbureted setup. Typically on a carbureted setup, you can just change out jets. You can change out the actual setup inside the carburetor to make sure that it runs correctly, or at least give you a ballpark, and then you can kind of adjust from there. With the EFI system, it makes all those adjustments itself. There's nothing we physically can change in it. So this is a little bit more tricky for the engine dyno people. Normally speaking, on a carbureted motor, Bob could just set this thing on the dyno, get it up to temperature, and have at it. Because of the fact that this is an EFI system, we have to kind of go through a little bit of a learning process. The wonderful thing is Bob is willing to do this because this is definitely a little bit more beyond what the normal dyno process is. So if anybody's watching this and is asking their engine builder or their dyno tune guy to do this, just understand you're asking for a lot. This is not the typical mount it up there and give it a rip kind of thing.
now we can prove it, but that's what I'm saying.
So by giving it an intake that breathes better,
and at a higher RPM on a small volume head, it's just killing it. I mean, badly. I can't get enough water off of it for it to even rev.
and you can see, I mean, it was like, it just hung at 4,000 RPM.
Now from 2 to 4,000, it was moving. It went up there, but when it got up to 44, it says, my tongue's hanging out and I'm done. And I am just feeling very comfortable that it's still, the head's matching the intake, that the combination is so far off that it just won't breathe.
Okay. That's literally the only thing we've changed since when it ran fine.
Yes.
Is just an intake swap. So.
Yes.
And even if it had an air leak or a vacuum leak, it
well,
wouldn't be
the
that.
oxygen sensor is going to help correct it.
Right.
I mean, it's not going to necessarily run low enough to burn a piston or anything, because the oxygen sensor is going to pick it up and should correlate with it. But yeah, well, early, the only thing that we did was we switched that intake manifold and it stopped running.
So there you go. No, the intake manifold does not fix our problem.
No, it made it worse.
It actually did really make it worse, because before we were kind of like hanging out at 4,200, but it would,
yeah, I mean, it would go above up to 57. We had it up to 55. Didn't like it up there.
Right.
But it still would turn RPM up there. Now I think we're putting so much fuel and air down in that thing that the hair is doing this. It's moving back and forth.
So bolting an intake on actually made it worse.
Absolutely. in which in all theory, and what everything that you learn from books and see, that it should. Because you put a huge ass intake on a little bitty head, it should do something bad.
Yeah. Which we've proven it does something bad.
It does something bad. Because that's literally the only thing that we changed.
So there you go. Don't just bolt a big ass intake manifold on your motor that refuses to rev. So, with a little bitty head. So the good news is we proved that just swapping an intake manifold is not going to fix our problem. The bad news is that verifies what our real problem is, the fact that these heads will not flow any more air. Which means these heads have to come off. Now the good news is we have a brand new set of Edelbrock aluminum heads sitting out there that have way better flow than these cast irons do. But that does mean we got to break this motor down, swap the heads out. So, back to work. Hot. All right, header's off. Intake manifold bolts are out. Header's still unbelievably, intake's still super, super hot. So give that a moment. We'll pop that guy off there. Valve cover bolts out. Oops. Take valve cover bolts out. Start going from underneath there. Hot! So something Bob and I have been talking about here off camera that kind of is important for us to point out to you guys for data purposes for all of you crazy gearheads is a question about spring pressure, because we did have a question about whether or not it was floating valves. The spring pressure on what's on these cast iron heads, we honestly do not know the answer to that. I don't have it written down. I don't have it from my engine builder who originally did this motor. The phrasing I was told was, it's as much as I can give it without worrying about something. Because what you don't want to do is over spring pressure it, or you're going to wipe the lobes off the camshaft. But you also don't want to have too little spring pressure, otherwise you're going to have some big problems there. So you have a book that you can work through, and you have your formulas you can work through. And then you have the heads that we just got from Edelbrock, and we were able to test, because Bob has this brand new handy dandy spring pressure tester. So same spring, different tester that you know is your old school one.
Yes.
And this is your new school thing.
Yep. Tells you what seat pressure is, open pressure at 545 lift, installed height is 1/900, what your coil bind is, what your coil bind height is, and spring rate.
Very cool piece of machinery.
It is awesome piece.
And it does it all in one pull.
One pull. It speeds up the process of putting a set of heads on very quickly. There's a little heavier spring. And we're getting some high pressures.
All you other machine shop guys getting jealous. Look at that. Beautiful PRW 1.6 rockers. Oh, but wait. Those 1.6 rockers could be a part of our issue.
And the installed height is now 1.940 because we put in some minus keepers to increase the spring, the installed height.
So what we're worried about here is testing these springs. They were in the 136 to 139 range on seat pressure, which is getting into, I guess we would say, dangerous territory on a flat tappet.
And some people don't think so, but
that's a lot of spring pressure on the seat.
We still got 300 on the open.
So we're 300 on the open, which is still, we shouldn't have any issue with valve float. And this is not a 8,000 RPM motor. So by changing the keepers, which Bob has all of this stuff here, we can decrease that spring pressure down to something that would be more
acceptable, making sure it lives.
Right. We don't want to fire this thing up and it eat a camshaft in 1,000 miles. So we're going to have a pretty long, involved conversation about camshafts and lifts and rockers and stuff. It's not something I really want to have on this video because it gets kind of in the weeds. If there's a lot of you guys that are interested in this, we can definitely have this conversation, but we have a book that we can compare the camshaft specs on the camshaft that's in this motor, which I'll put that up on screen right now so you can see exactly what this camshaft is, what these specs are. And it is a lot of camshaft, especially for these heads. Part of why it sounds so rowdy is because it's a lot of camshaft, but it's a really lot of camshaft, too much camshaft for these cast iron heads. So is that something that was kind of pre-planned? Maybe. We knew that there was an aluminum head swap in the not so distant future. So did it go a little bit more than it probably should have as far as the camshaft goes? Probably. So we didn't do ourselves any favor. So yes, it was possibly overcammed with what we have here, especially paired with the intake. And then obviously with the heads. So a smaller camshaft actually would have probably performed better with this setup. It just was not ideal for this intake manifold and this head setup. Now, in addition to that, the 1.6 rockers versus this camshaft being spec'd out as a 1.5 rocker adds a considerable amount of lift to the point where it's really aggressive. And really aggressive for a set of aluminum heads, way too aggressive for a set of cast iron heads that are not the greatest. So I think that's where we're finding a lot of our issues. We have a little bit of a mismatch as far as the heads just physically cannot handle what we're asking them to. Even the intake probably can't handle what we're asking it to, just because of the amount of camshaft that's in this thing. But the good news is this camshaft should work perfectly fine with this new Edelbrock set of heads and that new intake manifold. Even that new intake manifold, though, may be not necessarily ideal for this camshaft. It wants something like a Victor Jr. kind of setup. So we'll see. But these are the things that you have a trusted machine shop for. These are conversations you've really honestly got to have. And you've got to be able to have these conversations where you're going to spend a bunch of money and time that you don't necessarily need to spend, and you're going to be very unhappy with the product in the end. So, we're getting there. We're getting there. In order to move forward, we've got to move backwards. Yep. Come going apart. Rockers are off, everything else is off, busting the head bolts loose, heads come off. And then we get to find out the true story about these heads. We gotta see what the CC of these heads are, compare that to the CC of the heads that we have, and see what that's gonna do to our compression. And then we can also flow bench test these heads to double check that we actually know what we're talking about here and that we're running into an issue of flow with these heads. Man, I really don't want to tear down a beautiful motor that's already assembled, but in order to make this right, that's what you gotta do.
Always leave one bolt in so you don't end up with a head on your feet.
One head. Up. Nope. Interestingly, my center bolt on this side is a half-inch drive, or is a half-inch bolt. Interesting. We just need a little bit more leverage. No big deal. Weird. All torn down. Heads are off. Obviously there's quite a bit of carbon that's on top of the pistons. These do have a little bit of a dish to them. They are not true flat tops, so that's good news, which means it's probably going to bring our compression down a little bit. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of the information as far as the actual piston CC. They are Icon forged pistons, but I do not know their pocket. Also, I unfortunately was never given the information on the heads as far as what CC those heads are. So that's part of why we're doing this, is we're going to be able to solve that question and figure that out and have a true answer on what our compression is, or at least a truer idea. Ideally, on cast iron, we don't like going above like 9.5 to 1. Typically speaking, we want to be in the 9.3, 9.4, 9.5. That's it. We don't want to go any higher than that. That's aggressive, but not to the point where you're really dangerous. On aluminum heads, you could typically speaking get away with another point or so. on 93 octane, run 10.5 or so. So that's ideally where we'd like to be. Now, there is a possibility of adding, oh, I don't know, maybe a supercharger at some point in time in the future. So if it turns out that these heads have been cut down to be able to raise the compression up to 9.5 by reducing the chamber size that's on there, then we have the conversation about, do we cut these aluminum heads down from the 84cc chambers they are to a smaller cc chamber to be able to raise the compression, or do we just leave them alone and have the ability to run maybe some sort of boosted application in the future? Project creep. So, cleaning off these old heads that came out of there. Ran them in the tank real quick. Realistically speaking, this is going to be a complete set of Big Block Mopar heads that have already been worked. So maybe there's another build in the future on a Big Block Mopar. Don't ask me about that right now. More useful data. We are, what did you say, 18 thousandths?
Yes.
18 thousandths in the hole. And these pistons do have a little bit of a pocket to them. So that's going to help us also further identify the amount of compression we're going to end up with this on this motor with those heads. Gets the thumbs up. Now, what have we learned from all of this? Well, the answer is we've learned a lot. Where to start? First off, let's be honest here. Yeah, it's no longer on the engine dyno. We have pulled the short block off the engine dyno because we have got a lot of things that we need to address. As you can see, it is now sitting over here on an engine stand. One of the things we were able to check once we got the heads off is what exactly is the CC dish inside of this piston with these valve reliefs. Because our previous engine builder never bothered to test this. And the answer is, this is an 18cc pocket. So we've got a little bit of a difference between the surface of this, top of this piston here, and the surface here. This is lower than this set is. Plus you've got your valve relief, plus there's a little bit of a pocket here. So these are 18cc dished pistons. We also discovered the cc of the cast iron heads that this thing has been running on, which are 92 cc's. Which means they were never really cut because these castings, typically speaking, are in the neighborhood of 88 to 92 cc's. This particular set of heads basically worked out to be 92 cc heads, which is really big. So we've got a compression problem. Plugging all of our numbers into the calculators, giving a little bit of room for error. Typically speaking, we're talking this motor is running in the 8.8, 8.9 to 1. Maybe on a exceptional day it's 9 to 1, but it's low. It needs to be higher than that. The target for this motor was 9.5 to 1. At 8.8 to 1, we're missing a considerable amount of power just purely in compression. In addition to the fact that the camshaft is really designed to run much higher compression than what this is. Now let's talk camshaft. I will put the cam card on screen right now. So this is a 511 cam, 511 lift on the intake, which is a pretty damn aggressive camshaft. That's factored on a 1.5 rocker. Now this motor was running with a 1.6 rocker, so that actually makes that lift even higher. So instead of a 511 lift, it's actually a 542 lift, which is a lot of lift, especially on a set of cast iron heads. And that opens us up for another conversation. Coil bind and lift capabilities on these old heads. We have flow bench tested these heads. As you can see, they are on Bob's Superflow flow bench. And we hit coil bind right at 550 lift. So as that camshaft gets as rowdy as it gets to the absolute limit of what this thing could take. So that's actually causing a good portion of what our problem is. Flow-wise, these are actually pretty good. They flow 250 CFM, so should be good for up to 500 horsepower. However, the camshaft was a bit aggressive, especially with the 1.6 rockers. Had we put a set of 1.5 rockers on this, it might have been a lot better. It's still a real aggressive camshaft, and we still have a compression issue, so we would have still had that thing, but it would have definitely run better and made more power with a 1.5 versus a 1.6 rocker. So yeah, lots to learn. Now, what is the plan of action at this point in time? Well, you can see we have the Edelbrock aluminum heads here. All the springs and everything are out of them. We have been testing everything there is to be testing, and we're happy with our spring pressures on these heads. We're gonna do a little bit of playing with these, but otherwise they're going back together again, basically as they would have come from Edelbrock. We're gonna reassemble the other cast iron heads, and those will probably get another life on another Big Block Mopar in the not too distant future. We do happen to have the old 400 sitting on the floor that came out of this Charger. So those heads are actually in pretty decent shape. We'll put them back together again, and we'll run those probably on a who knows what. But what we are gonna run into here is the fact that if we bolt these aluminum heads on as they sit with an 84cc chamber, we are still going to be low on compression. We're probably be in the 9.3 range or so, 9.4 range, which is at least a point of compression lower than what I would really like to be on aluminum heads. I'd like to be in the 10.3, 10.4, 10.5 range on these heads. It'll make the cam happier. It'll give us more power just off of compression. Everything will work better. It's also possibly a portion of why we are having such an issue with fouling out plugs. So, yeah, the answer to what all we're going to learn is we're going to learn a lot. Unfortunately, not a lot of it's not good. It's very frustrating with the amount of money that's been spent on this motor, the amount of time that's been spent on this motor, the amount of time we've lost being able to enjoy this motor in the car. It's very, very frustrating when a lot of this could have been fixed or avoided with cam choice and rocker choice. You know, it is what it is. That's life. That's water under the bridge. It's past. But we have a good plan of attack. So what happens next? Well, Bob is going to cut an absolute ton of material off of those heads to get those 84cc chambers down considerably lower, to bump our compression up to get us where we need to be in the 10.5 degree or 10.5 to 1 range. And then we're gonna put this thing whole back together again, and you may have to cut the intake manifold to make it all fit too. So that's gonna be for another day. So there will be a third episode here at McVay Automotive of this 451 Mopar. But as we always say, we try to give you guys all the good, the bad, and the ugly. This one's full of a lot of ugly. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, please do stay tuned. Click on that subscribe button if you haven't already. Drop us a comment in the comment section below. If you have any questions or anything, we will do our best to answer them. If you've ever built a 451 Mopar, what do you think this thing is going to make? Any ideas? We've got some ideas. If you've made it this far, click on the like button, because we appreciate it, and it lets YouTube know that you're actually paying attention. All right, we'll see you in about a week or two. We got some more work to do. We'll see you later.